Thanks to Athletic Greens for sponsoring this video. Hey, what's up? Today, I'm gonna show you how to make a slammin' pot of beef stew that is just as comforting as a nice long hug from your mom. Assuming you like your mom. I do. I love her, actually. Love you, mother. To get started, I'll grab 5 pounds or 2.5 kilos of beef chuck, and I'll also get my oven preheated to 500F. In my opinion, standard issue beef chuck is the best for stew because it has tons of intramuscular fat and it's pretty affordable compared to the other fatty options like short ribs or beef shanks. To get it prepped for the pot, I'll need to remove the hard band of fat that runs through the 2 muscles inside of the chuck. That stuff just doesn't render down like the intramuscular fat does, and it ends up being kind of sinewy and hard. So I'll zip that out and then cut the 2 muscle groups longwise like this, then turn 90 degrees and cut into large chunks, about 1 inch to 1.5 inches across. If you started with 5 pounds of chuck like I did, after trimming it down and cubing it, you should be in the ballpark of 3.5 pounds or about 1,500 grams. Now into the bowl with this meat, I'm gonna add a good long squeezer of olive oil and then 2 generous pinches of salt. Next, I'll jump into the bowl and give the meat a quick toss to get it all coated up. Then I'll dump the beef onto a half sheet tray and spread it out evenly. Instead of searing this beef in a pot on the stovetop, which is generally speaking the first move of almost all stew recipes, I'm going to be searing it in the oven. In contrast to doing this on the stove, oven searing is both faster and easier than stovetop, and it's cleaner and passive. While this sears, I can prep all of my veggies. Speaking of which, the first of those is pearl onions. The fastest way to peel these that I've found is to cut off either end like this. Then using a paring knife, I'll make a shallow slice along the edge from pole to pole, only 1 layer deep. Then I'll peel it off just like it's wearing a little onion jacket. Now repeat that 50 to 60 more times and you've got the 200 grams of onions that we need for this stew. By the way, some grocery stores sell frozen pearl onions and those can work, but they're generally going to be quite a bit softer and kind of soggy. Next is carrots. When making stew, I always prefer to use the thickest carrots possible, and I like these over thin ones because they allow for maximum chunkiness in the stew. One of my favorite parts of beef stew is the giant, sweet, and borderline too soft carrots. So buy the thickest that you can and cut them into very, very chunky pieces like this. In total, we need 400 grams. Lastly, I'll take some quite large button mushrooms and just quarter them like this. For the same reason as the carrots, chunky is good. The mushrooms will get all softened and saturated with the flavorful beef cooking liquid and be a contender for one of the best bites in the stew. In total, we need 300 grams of quartered mushrooms. Back at the oven, it's been about 20 to 25 minutes since I threw this beef in and it's looking really well browned. So I'll pull it out and we can take a closer look. As you can see, with this oven searing method, pretty much all of the meat's surface area has taken on a crusty golden brown color. Getting this level of searing on the stovetop would take constant attention for well over 30 minutes and it would totally smoke up your whole house. Now, let's make this beef into stew. For that, I'll grab a large, heavy bottom pot and drop it on the stove over medium-high heat. Once it's hot, in goes a long squeezer of olive oil, then my mushrooms, my carrots, and the pearl onions. A strong pinch of salt to draw a little bit of moisture, and then I'll jump in with a wooden spoon and stir to get things combined. I'm starting the stew by sweating the vegetables to both par cook them a little bit so they reach their full tenderness once they're in the stew, and to build a base layer of caramelized roasty flavor. Oop! Lost a pearl. 5-second rule though, nothing to see here, except for this sock and sandal combination. Alley-oop. After 3 to 5 minutes, these veggies are slightly softened and have started to leave a little bit of glazy caramelization on the bottom of the pot. So now I'm going to flip them over into a bowl to save them for later. As you can see, these are just a little bit softened, but they're still mostly raw. Back at the stove over medium heat now, I'll add in a whole stick of butter, 115 grams, and I'll let that get nice and melty. Once it is, I'll add in 100 grams of all-purpose flour and then jump back in with my wooden spoon and stir that to make it all into a roux. If you can, use your spoon or spatula here to try and scrape up some of the brown bits from the veggies so that they don't get too dark and burn on the bottom of the pan. From here, I'm going to fry this roux for about 60 to 90 seconds or until it's no longer lumpy or raw and is taken on some nice light golden color like this. Next, I'm going to add in all of my Flavorful cooking liquid. That's vague, so let me clarify. To make this, I combined 2 boxes of store-bought beef stock, or 1,800 grams worth, then 30 grams of better than bouillon beef paste. Oh. With my mouth. Then 30 grams of tomato paste, 30 grams of wort, and then 4 packets of powdered gelatin to bring all the body that a long, slow simmered beef stock would have if we had had the time to make it with real bones and stuff. And from here, I'll just stir that to combine. Immersion blender not necessary, by the way. A whisk would work. Then the last bit of cooking liquid that I'm going to add into this pot is 1 pint's worth, or about 450 grams of dark stout beer. I like dark beer for stew because in its own way, it's kind of like a stock. It's full of dark, roasty, chocolatey caramel flavors and instantly adds a depth of flavor to the base of this meaty stew that you just can't get with meat stock. Plus, it's a touch sweet and that brings its own dimension of flavor. Now, I'm going to bring this liquid to a simmer, making sure to stir it pretty frequently so that the roux that we made stays evenly distributed as it's warmed, and I'll also make sure to scrape the bottom a little bit to loosen the brown bits that we glazed on from before. Once it's boiling, I'll add in all of my roasted beef and make sure to splash as much boiling liquid as possible everywhere, like I am here. Also, I'm going to add a splash of water onto this sheet tray and then give it a good scrape with my wooden spoon to release any of the browned beef fond that might be stuck on the pan. I'll pour that in, and once everything's in, I'll give it a stir. As you can see, the starch inside of this roux has gelatinized and expanded and started to thicken this stew. It's going to get thicker as we go here. So for now, I'm going to load this pot into my oven, which I've turned down to 300F, and cook it low and slow uncovered for 2 hours. Halfway through, or after 1 hour, I'll come back and give this pot a quick stir to work in any caramelized stuff on top and to make sure that things are cooking evenly. By the way, I'm cooking this uncovered to both naturally thicken the stew over time with evaporation and to roast the top. That's going to make the whole stew a lot more flavorful. Now I'll let this cook for 1 more hour, and in the meantime I'll peel up some potatoes. The potatoes that I'm using for this stew are a medium to small golden variety. I prefer smaller potatoes over full-sized Yukon Golds or Russets because they're a lot waxier and hold their shape better once they're cooked, especially with wet heat. Once these are rustically peeled, I'll just cut them in half. And I'll mention that I choose to peel them, but you don't have to. I just think that peel tends to be kind of papery once it's cooked, and it kind of messes with the luscious softness of the final stew. In total, I need 500 grams of potatoes. Now, after 2 hours of stewing this beef, it's time to add in everything else. At this point, I like to look at the viscosity of the sauce to determine how much additional thickening I think I'll need. The amount of reduction always varies widely in the oven, and it's much easier to add thickness than it is to take it away. I think this needs a little bit more, so the best way to add it in is to combine all the potatoes with the par-cooked vegetables from before, then add in 25 grams of all-purpose flour. I'll jump in and toss that to combine and mention that adding the flour this way allows it to hydrate evenly and quickly and prevents any lumpiness from happening. If you just added the flour right into the sauce, it'd be lump city. Now, once everything's well coated, I'll add the veggies and the potatoes into the stew and gently stir everything to combine. Next, to bring some optional depth of flavor, I'm going to add in a few sprigs of thyme and a bay leaf. In they go, and back into the oven goes my stew. From here, I'm going to cook this for 1 more hour, making it 3 hours in total. While that finishes cooking, I want to quickly thank Athletic Greens for sponsoring this video. If you haven't heard of it, AG1 by Athletic Greens is a nutritional supplement that's way more than just greens. It's a very nutritious drink that has vitamins, minerals, probiotics, adaptogens, antioxidants, superfoods, digestive enzymes, and mushrooms. To summarize all that, it's basically a 1-scoop supplement that you mix with water to help fuel your bod for whatever it needs, especially when you're too busy or active to dial in perfect nutrition. I drink AG1 at home to cover daily nutrient gaps, but it's also become a permanent fixture on my packing list when I'm traveling. It makes for a lot less clutter in my suitcase than packing all of my individual supplements. Just 1 scoop a day or 1 travel pack covers all of my bases when it comes to supporting energy, immunity, and gut health, especially when I'm too busy snacking on all of the street food in Korea to think about a well-rounded diet. So click my link below to try AG1 and get a 1-year supply of immune-supporting D3K2 and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. AG1 is available in the US, Canada, the UK, and Europe, and if you want some, the link is in the description. After 3 hours of gentle stewing, this pot of meat is looking great. Now, to determine doneness here, I'm going to pull it out of the oven and then fish out a chunk of beef and a chunk of potato. Those are the two texturally that I'm the most worried about. The onions, carrots, and mushrooms will definitely be tender at this point, and texturally we have a lot of wiggle room there. As you can see, the beef is shreddable and tender, but not mushy or falling apart, and the potato is easily cut with a fork, but again, not mushy. This stew is officially done cooking, but there's still 2 details that we need to see to before we eat it, and the first is all that fat sitting on top. To mitigate that, I'm going to use a small ladle and carefully skim off as much of it as I can. The restaurant move here would be to let this stew cool in the fridge overnight because that'll both enhance the flavors greatly and set all the fat on top, so it's actually really easy to remove. But this ladle move works pretty well, and the added benefit is that I get to eat stew now instead of tomorrow. Once the fat's removed, I'm going to give this thing a taste for salt levels. As always, I think it needs just a little bit more sparkle to be as good as it can be. 1 more taste to confirm.
Ooh.
Babe, the stew's good. Ooh! Now, the last step is to add in as many frozen peas as you see fit. I'm shaking in about 150 grams here in total, and I'll just stir those in to melt them. By the way, I know this beef is cooked perfectly because as I stir this, it's not being shredded into oblivion. It holds itself together, but just barely. Now to plate this up, I'll scoop 3 to 4 ladles worth into a low bowl, then top it with some fresh cracked black pepper, and then serve it with some rustic crusty bread to sop it all up. And for me, you guys, that is the platonic ideal of beef stew. We're talking various pleasantly soft, flavorful things sitting inside of a sauce that itself is insanely flavorful. It's not quite gravy either, because gravy is one note. This sauce is roasty, meaty, rich, velvety, and just a little bit sweet. It's perfectly in balance and it's everything that you want. Pair that with some unctuous fatty beef that's shreddable but not shredded, and some creamy soft potatoes. Throw in a little sweet pearl onion and you're freaking set. I really hope you guys make this one soon. The people in your life will thank you for it. Let's eat this thing. A big thanks to Athletic Greens for sponsoring this video.